What
Meeting is being recorded.
What we will actually see today is maybe just to bring up a simple ISG session. I mean, maybe not even with radius. We have about 1 hour, so I guess we'll do about this just today. So let's go back to this training. I don't know if there is an IP session, but somewhere over there in that training you will find how to configure IP subscriber normally. Let me go there. So I will try to always go back to this training so you can make maybe some note or so. So remember, we first need to recognize the subscriber. So we need to not to decide about our topology and or test that we want to do in ISG. So what I'm going to do just an IP address, so I don't even have to mess with the DHCP. I will bring the user with IP address, which means it's going to be L3, so it's not this slide, it's the next one, which is going to be routed, and we're going to just take the IP address and classify, which is really easy. I just need to actually send an IP packet. It should trigger the user. So that's what I'm going to do in this lab. I don't know if it's still running, but I know there's a script to find out if my lab is still running. No, sorry, first I need to connect. And I will maybe increase after. So my lab is giving me some information about the lab, and I can see it's still running. So virtual machine didn't really restart. I still have like 4 routers, which is okay because I remember 61 was the LAC, 160 connects also directly to 162, and I have a 163 for service. But today I will probably just take 160 and 162 so I can start doing some IG stuff. So for this, I don't need also to go to all of this stuff. I'm just going to take a small set of it. Yeah. Of course, I need the IP address, and it's not written here. This is the address. I took the wrong one, sorry. This is this one I need to take. And take this IP address because I still need to change this machine's name. So that should bring my 2 router connections. We'll remove a bit this one in the background. No. A bit the window here. So if the prompt is still ISG, so and this one I have also CPE. Let me check if we put some name here. Show interface description. No. So I have this one is going via directly to this one because I think we did the PVP connection here last time. Show subscriber. So it's still there, and I can see this one is leaving here and arriving here. It's been there for 1 week. You see this machine actually keep on running. If you would do on VMware locally, you can even pause the machine and actually having your lab restart automatically after. So what I want to do is create an IP subscriber. I have here a symbol topology. Obviously, we're not going to use this address. We're just going to leave it for PVPoE, although you could eventually also combine IP on this one. But just for the clarity, we're going to separate it. We shall run on the CPE. Just to review what we had. So my dialer and this interface. I also put this in a VRF. I'm probably going to do the same with this IP. So this router simulating the CPE going to be able to do different stuff without messing up with the default routing. I will confine them every time in the VRF. So here, okay, we'll keep the new definition. IP L3, for example. And as I'm lazy, I will just copy the address family over here because it's the same. And under the interface Ethernet, I will just create a new VLAN. VRF definition for forwarding here. And it's going to be IPL3. I'm going to just give him an IP address, whatever. So IP address 172.2, for example. Yeah, I need to put the .1q, I forgot. So let's put this 200. And then I can eventually even put the default route. So later on, if I want to do some redirection test or whatever, I could even use that one. I can do an IPVRF route. Sorry, for the VRF. Oh, sorry, so sometimes I'm confusing with NK. IP route, VRF, and then I can put the next up, which will be my SG, and that will be it. So, as I said, you can actually create, or we can test this connectivity with the customer also. For the HTTP as IP, you can just do a ping to make sure everything works fine. Also, when you're going to test with ISG, you're not going to be able to actually create a subscriber just by pinging the next hop. It doesn't work here like this. So you will see, even though I will configure some stuff for ISG, it will actually not really work. So here, do show run, and I had this sub interface probably for PVPoE here. We'll do the same, but this time I will put 200. Same stuff as the other side. Encapsulation .1q200. And so this is the service provider side, so I can put the IP address here 1 because this is what I wanted to use. And normally my IP should already work 1. So that's the first step, especially if you do a lab. Exclude any other issue. IP address. Okay, so that works. So now we're sure about the connectivity. So if I, like I said, if I would do this ping to create the use, it would not work. So I will just create a small area so I don't have to restart all the time all the command. Ping IPOE, for example, or IPL3. Exec. So IPL3 is working fine. Save the config. So now I will go through the ISG. So as we said, the first part is to learn the subscriber, and we know we're going to actually create IP routed because I'm going to send an IP packet. So for this, it's easy. I just go to the interface, go back to this, the one I created before, which is here. And I do IP subscriber. Obviously, I can look at the different option I have here, but interface, I know if I do interface, the subscriber will be created automatically when the interface comes up. I don't want to really do this. Maybe I can even here put a loopback after in my VRF and source the packet from this loopback, because that would still be an IP subscriber as long as it's having some route here in the SG to go back to the loopback. It should be okay. So that's eventually a way to create 10 subscriber, IP subscriber, just using loopbacks in the same VRF. But here I'm first going to use routed. There's no other option after. And here you can actually select the initiator. And here in our case is not going to be DHCP because I didn't do really IP DHCP server, or I didn't configure it here. Radius proxy, in case we actually coming from WRC, those WRC will send a radius accounting start. ISG will capture the information from this accounting start and create the session with it. Then you have a static and you have unclassified. IP at static session just when you configure the IP address statically. And here there's an option for IPv4 and IPv6 is our presenter. It's going to be all of them. And you see here a list. You can actually refer a list of IP address you want to use to initiate this. But simple, show an interface, Ethernet 200. Interface. So this is what I have configured so far. So with this, I should be able to learn the subscriber, but obviously I will not run AZ yet because I don't have any service policy. But we could see what eventually a debug would already show. In this case, debug IP subscriber. All, for example. And if you see that here, IP subscribe is doing some job already. If I would just create event or packet, it would probably be a bit more useful. Let's see if he actually detects it already. If I do this, you can see that he detects the packet at IP subscribe. So this functionality needs to work first before you can actually create a subscriber session. I will create an alias for subscriber session also here, unless it's already there. Include alias. No. Alias. Exec. Okay, so if I do SS, I still have, this is normally the new code. It's not really because it's ISG, but it's a subscriber. And the Polaris code handle everything on the subscriber. So it's normally it's there, but this guy is actually not ISG yet. If I would do show detail internal, you will probably see that there's no much information on this one. Normally here, I would start seeing some services or something for ISG, which is not the case here because I just have a PVP session. We still have, I think, a UID, unique UID. So this is another way to check up a session. So if you do show subscriber session and you have like tons of them, you will see here that unique ID. So you can do show subscriber session UID 50. And then you also have the information about this user. And it's interesting to do detail internal all the time because you have a bit more information about, for example, this one. You have the status normally here if you would have some protocol up. Another part that is interesting is actually the interface where it's coming from. And if you have a real ISG session, you even have some kind of history for the ISG session. So So it's interesting to have the detail internal all the time. So what I want to do now, I will actually want to create a policy because I want to be able to see show subscriber session when I actually initiate that ping. Also, I will already configure some loopback. I think with the loopback, it might create the users a bit on the machine. If you're not sure, make sure you have the OSPF maybe running with the service so you can cross the service. Maybe we'll do a bit later, but for the moment, let's configure loopback. Normally on the SR1K, I think if you really target a loopback, it would be okay because it's going to do a lookup, and then it's going to be fine. I'm not sure IP interface, but for this virtual, I'm not really sure. If not, I can still put a ping 1.1.1. You will try to route, it will create a user also, even though the ping maybe is not successful. Interface loopback 10, for example, P address. You see this interaction of the code, and actually in the service policy is the same. If you would configure this globally, it will interact with the entire box. Also, if you're using Polaris latest, make sure you have the right boot on the Polaris, because usually they boot like a security image or something, or license, but you need the APPX one, because that one is for subscriber. So you see a few cases from time to time. Even for PVPoE or something like this, you actually need this. So if you have some people from Costa Rica asking you stuff, you know that this is the first check you have to do, the license boot. And in iOS XE, it's even very problematic, because the session will come up. Every control plane works, but the data doesn't really transfer, so it's a bit trouble to troubleshoot. So here, I'm just going to give an address on the loopback. This box. So let's put 10.0. 8162. I'm going to ping this guy a bit later on. So just remove the debug now. So first, service policy, and I will go back to that training again so you can compare later on. If I'm looking at, so I skip the part of AA because I don't really need it for the moment. I skip the part of radius, I don't need it either. So maybe I can go actually directly to an example of bandwidth service, because eventually it's good to test with the service. I could create this default bandwidth service locally. I could create an open garden, whatever name I really want. And then the next step is obviously to create this policy type control. So let's do something similar to here and create some policy type control. And the service is not here, so let me check if there is an example somewhere. Well, like for example, this one is a good one, open garden. So first, when you configure IZ, you're probably going to have to think about what you're going to do. So if Open Garden is actually some service that you want to give for free, so you could say, I want to be able to ping only this address, maybe, because that's a server that is DNS, and we could test even if it actually works after. But like I say, IOL, I'm not really sure this stuff going to work, but I could eventually create a OSPF network and make sure that the packet cross the IOL. But let's see. If I configure an Open Garden service, it's to give some service to somebody, definitely access to DNS probably. That's what the customer will configure. So that means he needs to match. And remember the process of matching a packet inside a traffic class. traffic class is some like this small pipe, if I could go back to my explanation I did at the time. So we're going to create a small pipe that will allow the traffic to go through the ISG, but only for this subscriber. Obviously, if another subscriber takes the same service policy and take the same function, is going to be having kind of the same service, and so on. So I could have eventually 2,000 subscribers at the end with the same service. So here I need to think about my access list. I need to think about the traffic class, and I need to think about using a correlation of a name. So in ISG, it's a bit of a trouble because if you're missing something, it will complain. Of course, you can go back, but then it's a bit of issue. So in 9K, it's a bit better because you can construct the entire config and then commit. So if you miss something, you can still do show configuration, but here you have to think about everything beforehand. So what we're going to do, we're going to try to give a service, and for the service, we're going to send traffic, so we need to create a class type traffic, not a call, but a class map type. Is it a control? No, because I'm actually taking traffic here information, so traffic, and then what do I do? I match any, and there's actually no other option here, and then I can give him a name. Up to me. Now, if you do remember show run section, maybe it's good to keep the same name all the time. So, for example, I could create IPL3. We start with IPL3, so I know everything that is related to this policy. It's just going to be a single IP user, and with that IP user, I can do a lot of stuff. It's going to be IPL3. I will always use that name, and I will obviously call it class because it's going to be a class. And what else can I do? Well, since I'm going to go through the Open Garden service, let's call it OpenG. So that's going to be my class. And what does it need to match? It needs to match traffic that is eventually going to the local IP address here. Or eventually, I will think about maybe create a loopback across the connection I have with this other router that is called my service, and giving that one also. Even then after, I can create an OSPF, give him a lot of loopback and see if my class really works correctly. Maybe not for today, but anyway, we can test this further later on. So obviously, I need to match traffic, and for this, I will match access group. Access group, I have two options, input and output. In ISG, you need to define both. So if you would create that pipe that I was explaining before with only in, it would only match in traffic. You could decide that you don't use default drop. In that case, probably out will always work. But here with input and output, I want to really segregate the traffic only to this few IP address I'm going to give in the access list. So for the access list, let's call it again IPL3, ACL, and for example, in, because it's input. Put the name in between, it will probably go better, and then I can use alt and put also output here. So now I've created a feature, I would say, or traffic class, but I still need to assign it to a service. And why? Because the only way I can apply this inside a subscriber is via a service. There's no other option. So obviously I also need to create the access list, IP access list extended, and I will obviously use the same name. When you configure, it's actually better to do copy and paste, because if I would do this, the service will not come up because it will not find the access list. So then the user will flap all the time. So IP access list ACL in, what do I want to do? I want to match, and it's called permit. But remember the concept of ISG is matching. It's not that it's going to deny this traffic or not, it's just going to match within this pipe that I just created above. So once I have assigned this to a service, I could even potentially on the service giving some costs or whatever, then it's going to match only this one. So I need to permit any to, because it's the in direction. So you always need to think about CPE. Whatever is coming from the CPE is in, whatever is going to the CPE is out. So in the in direction, I need to permit traffic from that CPE to this loopback I actually defined here. So I will put this one, host. That will match traffic coming in if I do a ping. What I will also do, I will create some other, maybe I will put a loopback in my router, in the service router, which is actually 63. So I will call everything that's starting with 63 will be something on this router, on the service router. Maybe later on, I can create multiple loopback on that service router that will be here, and testing if the two would really fail. That could be a good option to test. So now I did the in. So this traffic goes from the CPE to the service and needs to come back. Obviously, in the other direction, again, if you would do this with iOS XR, it's you don't need to create both direction in iOS XR, but iOS XE. So you see, once you're going to do BNG on 9K and ISG on 1K, sometimes you confuse stuff and then something doesn't work. So it's also good to troubleshoot. So here is the opposite, obviously, because the packet will come back from that host and will go to a CPE, but sometimes I will have a lot of CPE, I will just create any on the destination. And same for this one. So now I have a match of traffic within this traffic class that I created here. Now I need to assign the traffic class to something, and the something is a service because there's no other way. I can actually bring some feature for a subscriber using policy type control then with a service. So maybe PBHK and so on, we'll see a bit later what it is. But right now, I'm just looking at service function. So I go maybe do a show run, so just to repeat what I've done. Not very much, actually. The access list, I've created my both access lists. In the in, I have anything coming from a CPE will go to that host, is permit or matching that ACL. Here also for that host and the revert direction going out back to the CPE. Then here, what did I create? I created a class that assign those two access lists actually in input and output. This will be eventually the traffic class. It's easy to remember. It's traffic, and with the class on the back, it's a traffic class. For this, I create a service now. Policy, maybe I need to exit this one. Policy map. Obviously, I have a lot of stuff, and you can see here, some people would eventually type the name directly, but then it's a cost. Some people try to configure across the first type, and then they wonder what they would do. Then they give some whatever, and then they associate that somewhere, and the cost doesn't work because this is something else. Oh, the worst part is actually when the customer did this service policy, because it was under the interface policy map. I think you can actually assign this also under the global or service policy, but it's actually under the interface. We'll probably put some more information. So let's go back to my interface. I was using here. Actually, probably it's written here. Oh no, that's the other one. Okay, it's also in the debug. So you have service policy. Actually, it seems that it doesn't, and I could use type control, but suppose I do some mistake here. Sometimes you actually go out of the interface. And then if the customer go out and actually type this, I don't know if you work here, but before it was. So you see, you can actually type, if it puts this in the global, every PVPoE connection and even L2 VPN and so on are actually submit to the ISG functionality. It means you cannot bring any PVPoE, and like I said, even pseudo-wire and stuff like that would fail. So, and sometimes in big configs you don't see this really easily. So let's go back to my policies service. Actually, that's the one I wanted to use because obviously I need now to create a service, and this is here. It's nice. Control will be what I'm gonna configure after to apply to the subscriber. So the service is a service, and at the end what I do is really applying a feature to this one. So let's go back with using IPL3 because that was the name that I start with. And what do I do? A service, well, let's call it serve, and OpenG, for example. That's my service, Open Garden. Then I have here priority number. If you remember, the way we match traffic is following that priority. If you don't put any priority, it's the highest priority, which is probably okay, maybe for Open Garden. But suppose you would have multiple services that need to access maybe the same server, but with different options at some point of life of the session, then maybe not using any priority at all is maybe not a good idea. Or eventually you want to actually charge the customer when he starts doing DNS, when he has internet connection, maybe that priority of this Open Garden should be less interesting than the one of your internet service later on. Maybe making less interesting is probably 1000, that's the least, 0 is the highest, but let's put 10 just to. So it's not a sequence, it's really a priority in which order we will match the traffic against the different service that we have for the subscriber. So once I have this, I can associate something, class, which type of class traffic, because that's the one I actually configured a bit before with this class Open Garden, which is here. So this is the one I now associate under my service, and when I know this class is actually going to match traffic. So it's traffic. The name, obviously, the same name. If you miss the name, it would not work because it will not find it, and then again, the service will not work. That's it. You have associated the traffic. At this point, it would already be good. You will match it because you associate the traffic. What else can I do here? I can do some feature on it, on this class. So if I get this traffic matching into this class, I could apply some police. I could apply some specific accounting. So maybe I will refer to a radius. Suppose the customer would want to account every DNS packet just to make sure there's no DOS attack or whatever. You could. Just using here accounting and see every DNS packet that you send as a CPE. You could use prepaid function, redirect. Those are all the features that you can apply under a traffic. So, but in my case, I don't really care. So I just exit. What I do care is since it's the Open Garden service, I want to permit only those two servers to be accessible by this customer. I obviously don't want him to be able to access internet. So I remember that if I don't do the default drop, is actually going to be a problem because everything is going to go through. So there is a class type traffic default. And traffic. And then here you will see you can put the name, but you also have the default one. Under that one, once I go into default, I can say input or output. Obviously, if I would drop here in the output everything that didn't match that previous traffic class, it would probably fail on many of the stuff. But potentially, I will still need to handle all the traffic. So I will put in out. And then I need to do what I want to do. With that default is actually to drop. So now, if I look at this service, I would match. Let's go back to the running config just to confirm what we have done. And actually, now that I've used IPL3, it's even better. I don't need to do show run all the time. I can do show IPL3. This is my config of ISV, actually. That's why I always start with this IPL3. So what did I do? I create a service which will match traffic, which traffic it will match the one that is associated with this class, which actually associated to access list. What is the access list doing? It permits to that host, and here's the return of it when it comes back from that host. So should be able to actually just give some simple IP connectivity to this user using those addresses. Obviously, this address here is not available yet. That's something I will need to bring up via the service, which is not probably today. I need to reconfigure OSPF so that I don't need to redistribute all the stuff all the time or do a route static. So here, basically, I have configured the feature for the customer. But now I need to apply it on this IP subscriber, and that's going to be with the policy type control. So if I go back to this the stuff here that we did, policy type control. Okay, here, for example, I have an example of a policy type control. And it's important because that's how I will apply all the rules. And when you see a customer config like this, you wonder what he's actually doing. We eventually, with this session here, just need to do the start. Because with this, I will already be able to create functionality for this IP. I will see the event session start because the session start when I get the first IP packet. And then I apply the service name, and the service name we already configure. It's this OpenG that we actually configure. So this feature will be assigned to my IP subscriber. Basic ISG config, actually. And it's a good start to understand a bit the functionality. There's no need to go to the complicated one directly. So first I configure my policy map type control because now I'm going to control the user. And again, let's use this IPL3 so that when I do show run, I will be able to match all the stuff with section. In the case of policy, you will see there's no much option at the beginning. And again, as opposed to the 9K, here we start with class. And the class here is not going to be traffic because we're actually going to control the user. So this is more like going to be a control. And I don't know if there is any other type here, but I don't think so. No, actually, it's no other type than control. You could say always, or you can actually assign something here. If you assign something here, it's a class map type control that you will need to define that match maybe some particular user. Maybe you want to match some MAC address or some IP address, and then it would only match those users. In my case, I don't really want to be too complicated. So every time and on which event, we'll see what option we have. Access reject, well, when the session comes first, probably not looking at an access reject at that time, probably not looking at those either, credit exos and so on, log on and log off, probably not, because it's the first time I see the user, so I would doubt it would be already going to a logon case. So you see a few different stuff. Don't mistake between session and service start. Service is when I apply the feature on the customer. Session start is when I actually handle the customer for the first time, which eventually is the subscriber. So session start. Maybe I will do a terminal width a bit larger. So. Okay, so if I go back to what I just typed before, class tab control always. Every time there is a session start, I will apply what? I will apply the following rules. And there I start with the number from 1 to 254. You will see if you do test in the lab or try config, not all the function are there. And sometimes you're obliged to do one. We'll see a bit later on all this stuff when we go a bit more in detail. So what do I do here? It's authorized. No, actually, the only thing I really want to do with this subscriber here is giving him a simple open garden service that will actually do something. Just be able to transfer a ping or whatever to those two IP addresses I assigned in the access list. So it's not an authorization that I'm going to handle because that would be really accessing a radius. Is not this portal post account logon delay. It's more like an event that will actually happen with that user. Is really this one, the service policy. I want to apply a service. It's not very obvious because you say service policy, but actually it's really a service. And it's a bit even more confused when you type this because at this point, it's not very clear that I'm assigning a service, but it's actually the way to go. And you see the unapply, and actually the apply is just a name. So instead of having apply and unapply, well, you need to type name for apply. If you look at the description, it actually says, but if you only look at this first column, it's not always easy. So name, so basically what I'm saying, you should apply a service. Well, which service? The one I just configured a bit before, which was this IPL service open guard. On the back, there's nothing. So that's it, because I could create another one, but what would I create? Not much. In this session start, I don't have much option, actually. As you can see, there's no logon possibility. There is no other stuff that might be like credit exos or something like this. So I can put a timer. That's interesting. Maybe later on if you want to do some redirection to play with timers. But basically here, that's it. Show run section IPL3. If I look at this section, what I did now, I've created the policy type control. What is actually happening in that policy type control is when there is a session start, this is actually what is actually written here. When a session starts, I apply a service, which is named IPL3 service OpenG. What is this service? Maybe in the case of customer, you would not see it in the local config because you retrieve it via the radius. But at this point here, we don't have anything yet to radius. And it will actually normally look locally, which is here. Defined, so it's good. If I look again once more, class traffic and IP address. So if I apply this service, it should be working fine. Now, the only thing left is actually to apply that control policy under the subscriber. Run interface Ethernet Azure.200, I believe it was. No. So this one, the opposite. And I see here, I already had the IP subscribed. Now I need just to configure this here. Which one? This one, tab control, but this time it's called service policy. Service policy, and maybe that would work. Okay. So basically now, if I create an IP packet, I should go on this step recognizing the IP subscriber, because I'm going to look at those IP packets coming on this interface. I should eventually be able to retrieve the IP address source of the subscriber. And then once I have this, I will start creating the control of it. Control being the policy that we were just looking at a bit before, just assigning one service. So far, nothing complicated, but probably, I'm pretty sure it will not work. So SSS is the good stuff. I have a POE, so at least some subscriber functionality in that code. If I do a ping, which is my alias here on that CPE, I want to be able to see a subscriber. Eventually, it doesn't work. So what is happening? Don't know. Maybe I can repeat a bit. Repeat the 1000, see what it does. Maybe with a bit more zero. Okay. So I see nothing happening. That's probably what the customer might have at the beginning. Nothing is really working. Okay. So what else can you debug? Probably first, in this stage, looking at what the subscriber is coming with, which means I'm going to look at IP subscriber. I already know this one work because I did the debug a bit before. Next step, if we know this IP subscriber is actually working here, because I debugged it, and I see the interface is able to look at the packet and it can recognize it in the driver. So you should be able to recognize that source packet, which actually I see here. And just for those that join later, this interface here is fitted with 16.2. That's my interface. I configure, but went too high. So this is the address I configure, which is correct. Is actually the one he needs to recognize. But I don't see any subscriber. So the thing is, probably next step is to hit that policy type control, like we saw in the config. So let's debug the subscribe to see what's happening. Debug subscriber manager. Oh, sorry, that's an NK. Here it's policy. And you can do all. Better not configure this in logging console if you have an ISR9K, but for the rest, there shouldn't be any trouble. So I will do like you should do, logging console information. So debug is not really take to the console, show log. Probably for ISG, you will need a bit longer debug than 4K. So logging buffer, and actually it's I see often customer picking up the debug from the telnet, you're still missing line. So you better really push it to the buffer and then ask him to do a show log, because even with the telnet you will miss line of that subscriber policy stuff. So it's sometimes it's very boring because you're missing step and you don't know what really happened during that step. So let's put one back. Okay, so that's my debug. Show debug is running, and you see there's still some reference to SSS. There was the code before, so it's the same. So let's see if I do a ping, and this time I will not repeat it that much time because eventually a ping 1 would work. So it should create. Obviously, there's nothing about that subscriber. If I do show log, I don't even see anything about policy. A bit troubling, because if I do IP subscribe, I'm probably going to see it. It's just because I'm picking the address, configuring the interface. So just to show you the effect, there's nothing here, and actually it's because I'm picking the local address on that interface. So maybe I still have it in my history. Or another stuff that is maybe good is to create, increase the history of the terminal when you do ISG, so you can recall the command. Tell me the history size, 256, show history, and you have here, actually I missed the show run, but eventually if I go back to what I did before, I can see this is my address. With that address, you will never create a user because it's local. So let's see what I have else. Show IP interface brief. Like I say, I'm not really sure about the, where is he printing? Show IP interface brief. So with IOL, if he actually would trigger it, but I will try to ping this one. So I will change my alias because I always get trouble. And pushing, that's a bit of a trouble. I just increase the window. So let's put this one, for example. See if it works. Or at least I should see some trigger from the subscriber. Nothing, but maybe I see debug. Nothing, so I will try to cross with IOL. So I was also using this, what I could do is actually do .1.1. I don't know if that is gonna go. Obviously it's gonna fail, but let's see if I have some debug. Okay, this time I have some debug. So you see, even if it's not really known or if the route is not there, you can still trigger it. Obviously, you know it's gonna fail, but that's not really the purpose here. The purpose is to see a show subscriber, and actually he did it. Funny, because I didn't have the configuration command a service, and he still did. Maybe no. It's a bit bizarre because in most of the version you will not get this working. And the reason is that he should install a service, but he doesn't have the service command in the authorization. A service authorization is not configured. But apparently this one, I don't know which version it is, but seems to work. Okay. So let's see what he did in SSS actually. Maybe it's still not created correctly. So actually, you see, it's not really working because the policy which is class every time a session starts, I should apply that service. If I look at here, I don't see this service. There's no reference to it. He did create the IP subscriber, but there's nothing else. And he didn't even stop it or failed it, which is probably more like a bug, because if that service is not available, it should eventually drop that session. Here we can see what we would match, but again, there's nothing. So it's probably due to a very old version here, but anyway. What we see is that the service is not activated. Was it supposed to be? Yeah, because that's the session. So if I do show log, we should see what is actually going on. So going through the debug, first you will learn the via IP subscriber, but that you don't really need to debug all the time, especially if you already see this part here. You see the manager doing some stuff, then he's actually looking at the interface, probably This part is always just to recognize the subscriber and into SSS or subscriber code. It's going to pick up all this information and tell ISG what he needs to do with it. What we also know is that once we've reached this one, we should actually go to the policy type control, and we can see here that the interface is closed with that config. Then is go through all the steps that I have configured, and it says here, evaluate session start, but it seems to not match here. This didn't really say if it was a match or not match, but I suppose it's missing the match on the front. But obviously it's not a session restart because we never saw the user before. Access list, evaluate, now it says again, they evaluate for session start, is doing multiple times the same stuff. And then here again, a bit bizarre because it's not really a session restart. Oh, sorry, restart is fine, but it's not. So he went through all those rules, and then he seems to look at all the event for a session, session service found. It's an event, but obviously is not the case here. But the only thing he really matched normally is the session start, even though he didn't really do a match on the session start. Then normally he should match this one. Then if per use push handle is invalid. Did not match per use with main session. It's not very verbose here, and it's a bit strange as output. But anyway, I know I wouldn't need to enable the service, so what else can I do on the debug in this version? Not much, I guess. Policy all edit. Debug subscribe policy all, yeah. Should have at least put something else, maybe. There's nothing else. The detail event, I might eventually add it. Under all, you don't have anything else. So maybe signed service is not working. I might debug the service. It's not very obvious when you look at the first time. So let's clear the lock and see if eventually he says something about service. I did the detail, yeah. Okay. Maybe I need to clear the subscriber. Or clear the subscriber. You can clear a subscriber per UID also. Session UID and that 51 here. Easy gone. Yes. Or start again and see if I have maybe a bit more information looking at this. He's not really saying much. Here it does say that session is start, but I don't see anything about event on the services. A bit bizarre. Well, I can eventually recontrol this IPL stuff. Just to make sure I see the session. Oh, actually, I did a mistake. It's session restart here, and I should have configured session start. So let's go back and configure a session start. And eventually I can put the same stuff. So you see, if you actually configure this, it was actually why it was not a case of session restart, and the session start was not really configured. So let's go and put that same config actually. I don't think you will have a restart case in IP actually. This restart case is probably more like for the DHCP case because we already know the binding. So here now I have the session start. So if I look at session, probably it's going to be UID 52. Yeah, and I will clear this 152 and restart everything. So I ping again. SSS, not even worse because it's gone. But if I look at debug, maybe I will see now something really about service like I was saying before. It's a bit more clear, I guess, right now. We have IP session start. This is actually what is applying, and now we really have the match on session start, which is a lot better than before. Then we create some stuff for ID manager and all that stuff, but not very interesting. And he's really talking now about my service that I wanted to apply because I see this as the next step and more cancel, or not cancel. And then you see here, he's trying to handling a AAA authorization, sending a request, and you see, even though I didn't really configure anything about the radius or that stuff, AAA always take action in ISG case. And since he doesn't know the service in his cache, he actually needs to download, and that's actually what he says here. He wants to download, service download require, authorization, fail method. That's actually our problem. Default method not configure is actually saying the only thing you need to do is really spend the time to look at each line. Once you are familiar with debug, you know that you need to look for that service not in cache and see what's happening after. But here you see the cancel request. You also see that a request failed, and it says deny with no session because when the service fails, you should deny the session, which is correct behavior. So why is actually AAA failing is because I don't have a policy. But again, don't get confused with the radius because AAA is an authentication authorization and so on, but accounting also. But you don't need to have a radius for this. You can handle everything via a local actually. So if I do a AAA auto, because it's actually what he says here, it's an authorization. Okay, let's go under auto and see what I have. But I have to subscribe a service. This is actually exactly what I need to enable that service. What do I do? Default. Well, should I use default? Probably because I didn't give any name anyway. And when I look at this debug, it's really saying that default method is not configured. So let's type the default. And should I use group? Right now, not really needed because I didn't configure radius. So let's do it local because this is actually the service where the service is configured is local. So again, this SSS didn't come up, so let's clear the lock once more. And do a ping. And obviously this one failed. Next time we can bring some OSPF in the session and see what's going on. Now, if I look at the session IPv4 and you see it's unauthenticated, that's normal because I didn't really send it to a logon or something on the session. SSS detail internal. I could do maybe the UID so I don't get the one of PVPoE. So now I have a bit more information. Which I can see now this service is actually installed. So that's the interface information, the service information, and the service information really match what I actually wanted to install. I also see the access list being referred here, and actually this is creating my traffic class, which means is that small pipe we talked about a few weeks ago. It's the feature I apply on that subscriber. If the packet arrives from that CPE in and he matches the access list that I configure at the beginning of the session, you should see some increase here. if also here, because match any will always increase with the rest. So if you have a multiple service, potentially everything will match here unless maybe you have some drop. You can see here that the drop is also there. It's actually the default. The signs I configured drop is mentioning it as drop, which means now signs I configure the access list to only access to 2 servers, everything else will be dropped, which would be the potential case of a guy doing redirection with some access to a portal and eventually some access to DNS server. So this is a bit on the matching of traffic. Very interesting look, very interesting information, especially when you're going to do redirection. Is the packet really matching? Do you have a return on portal with the show command? You can already see a lot. Another interesting part here is obviously the history, but in our case, it's not that much. You see the service associate, and there is no real history yet. I guess here, maybe later on, you will create it, but normally here you will see also some kind. Actually, sorry, it's on the top. So what I did on this session, password and username, it's hidden, even though it's actually not configured for this service. There is a hidden password which is called Cisco, and since we have actually called AAA, and AAA did some kind of authorization, is still using this information. Username being service, the service name. Eventually, this is what you would send to a Regis to. So this information would be your username to the Regis. What is this service? I see here the output and input of the access list and the default drop. So really what I have configured on this service is in the history of my session. If some other event happened on that session, this will go a bit lower and a new event will be inserted in this config history. Again, interesting, especially when you have cases where the customer has done a few stuff. Maybe looking at that would give you an idea to reproduce a problem. And there, everything that has been applied before account logon, obviously it's our case, we didn't really account logon the user. So everything is correctly installed in that subscriber now. And you see, there's a lot of stuff happening just to bring a single service. I don't know if we still have time. I guess we're going a bit over, about 1 hour, I think. Shankar, what do you want?
Yeah, I think we are crossed 10 minutes more than what was allocated. So it's up to you. If you have something to cover, I'm fine.
No, what I will do, maybe I will configure the OSPF just to show you. Maybe I can even do this actually with this packet here. But since it's a local one, it's a bit troubling to test really this feature here. So next time I will create the OSPF network already. Sure. And then we can start doing some other stuff. I don't want to spend too much time on this with people. So I guess you all know how to configure OSPF. So. Okay, so I guess I will not hold the people too much. It was a really basic IP sessions coming up. Next time we can bring an DHCP, which is adding a bit of complexity because we need to handle with DHCP server, and then. After that, we'll bring the feature one by one on one of those subscribers. Okay?
Okay. Thank you very much, Alan.
You're welcome.